is here today to bring you some more information. Al Kietzmann is the president and franchisor of Copier Consulting. He brings 30 years of industry experience as an independent vendor neutral. I hope he's going to talk about that. Expense reduction specialist. So since founding his faith-based consulting firm in 2010, he has saved clients more than $5 million through his proprietary process. He'll talk more about that. He's had 15 years in sales, 15 years as a buyer advocate, making him uniquely qualified to expose the wasteful spending and negotiate fair, reasonable pricing for all of you. So we're grateful for our partnership with Al and eager to learn about how his proven expertise can support the financial health of our schools and centers. So Al, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Well, thank you, Corey. Thank you for that introduction. And hello, everybody. Welcome from the Midwest. I know some of you are on the West Coast and some are, I think I saw one in Texas, and I'm not sure how many are on the East Coast, but some of you are good morning and some are good afternoon. So Corey is right. I've been in this industry for 30 years. And today I just want to share a little bit about my background and the how, what, and why I do what I do for the benefit of the buyer. So I created Copier Consulting after being in the copier industry for 15 years. And I found that there were a lot of issues or concerns that I had. And I converted that knowledge, education, and training to work today and for the last 15 years solely as the buyer. So I want to give you a little bit of my background, explain my process, why I think it's a good value, and why a collaboration with you as buyers or prospective buyers down the road, whether it's tomorrow or in 4 or 5 years, is a big deal. I was raised in a family-run small business. My mom, dad, and uncle ran an auto parts store. And when I was real little, would sweep the floors and build a soda machine, eventually help by putting parts on shelves and delivering parts to the auto mechanics in our community. And my dad and uncle and mother raised me with a solid work ethic, basically, to never quit and never give up. And once I got into college and out of it, I had taken marketing classes, wasn't really sure what I wanted to do, and I was introduced to copier sales in 1992, and I worked for 3 different dealerships and was trained by 6 manufacturers and 6 leasing companies. And I did that for 15 years and hit my quota every month. But the process was, well, what have you done for me lately? That was the conversation with my supervisors, sales managers, etc. And it was a high pressure sales role. The sales reps must hit a quota, and they sell typically by payment, and they enjoy the unregulated industry that they work in. And so there's a lot of omissions that I find in contracts. So from the time that I left the copier industry, I was recruited to work for Northwestern Mutual. And after I had realized for me to get a job in the regulated financial services industry by submitting fingerprints, background checks, FBI background checks, it was a light bulb moment because I never had to do that in the copier industry. And it was then that I thought, now this is making a lot of sense. This was really for me connecting the dots on areas of business that were a conflict with what I learned with my family and what other industries were doing and how they were selling suitable and appropriate products for their clients. So as I was embarking on a new career in insurance sales, I called on my prior clients. 7 of them said no, thank you to life insurance, but they said, we're going to be buying copying machines. Will you help us buy the copying machines? And I said, sure. And I saved them all money, and that began or sparked my entrepreneurial journey to creating Copier Consulting. So as Corey mentioned, over these last 15 years, I've worked with many organizations, saving them over $5 million, negotiating with them to make sure that they receive fair and reasonable contracts, terms, conditions, rates, and pricing. And if you've ever gone down that path, and if I'm able to take the liberty to somewhat anticipate your experience, it's not something that most people enjoy doing. They don't wake up that morning that they have to negotiate a copier contract and say, boy, I can't wait to do this. Quite honestly, it tends to be the opposite. People just are wanting to get it off their plate as fast as possible. And I believe the vendors use that to their advantage. The sellers are typically leasing or selling these payment streams. And there's a plethora of information and financial metrics and critical decision making that goes on if we had more of that raw data to make the best decision. And so I've created this process of assessing, researching, and evaluating vendors. And the role that I play is to fully understand what it is that you need, want, and desire for equipment, what it is that you currently have for equipment, how you use it, why you use it, and maybe what the vendor agreement or contract says, because that will spell out or explain quite a lot of information. And as someone that I like to consider myself on your team, but not your payroll, as a subject matter, and I humbly submit, specialist, a collaboration with the buyer is more empowering. It just benefits the buyer. The sellers behave differently. Corey and I were just chatting before the Zoom call started about the analogy that sometimes comes to mind. I often say, when the cat's away, the mice will play. But when the students see the teacher leave the room, we start to see some, well, maybe it was just me, but I would misbehave when the teacher left the room. Until the teacher came back, of course, then I was the most angelic child that was in the room. But I think the copier vendors today take a look at this item or this product and service, realize that they're somewhat in control and buyers aren't aware of all of the details that go into it. So they try to sell a very simple process through a monthly payment called a lease and or their maintenance contracts. So sometimes I hear people asking me, what's the real big deal? What's the problem? I think there's quite a few of them. I mentioned the fact that the industry is not regulated. I shared some of these problems with my legislator and senator in 2017 with our division, state division of consumer protection, Department of Financial Institution, and some of their legal counsel at the Wisconsin State Capitol. And they agreed with me and drafted Assembly Bill 684, Senate Bill 580 tied onto that. Unfortunately, after our testimony in favor of the bill, we had a couple dealers and a lobbyist for the leasing company testify in opposition. It did die in the Senate. So there is no law, not just in Wisconsin, that protects copier buyers, but it is a national law. The testimony from the leasing lobbyist was, if it passed in Wisconsin, it would set precedents in the United States. I have experience working with a national expense reduction company in 2015 to 2017. And I saw $1 million contracts in the healthcare industry and government. And the interesting discovery for me was the copier lease and vendor contracts that are likely in your file cabinet are almost exactly the same as the hospitals that had thousands of devices and millions of dollars in contractual obligation. And so having that light bulb moment said, you know what, this messaging is about the same. The only difference is how many devices do they have under lease and what's their monthly payment? What is their contractual obligation? It's exponential. So I see a lot of problems with omissions in contracts. When I look at somebody's lease or their maintenance contract, and I'm looking for keywords that help me determine what it is that they have the buyer signing, it's omitting a lot. And what I mean by that is that over the years, I have been on a constant quest to make sure I have all solid questions to ask the vendors when we go to market. And it's up to 70 some questions today in our request for proposal. Approximately 20 of them are directly tied to the cost or the pricing. The other 50 are elements of the longevity factor, parts availability, duty cycle, life cycle items, and critical items that will help you draw your conclusion for how long the machines last. They're often prematurely upgraded. Almost all contract terms are 5 years, 60 months. Rarely are they beyond 63 months. And with parts availability of 7 years up to 10, the goal of the vendor is to send a sales rep in and have somebody sign a new lease on the appearance of some savings, maybe a little bit more in the monthly payment, justifying a feature or benefit. But that process just leapfrogs a payment scheme or plan or method. And if one owned the device or understood the totality of the options, they might keep it longer than the term, therefore not having an equipment payment and saving a lot of money. Keeping them from unnecessarily spending money and reinvesting on equipment they've already invested in with the maintenance contract. They're almost always non-cancelable and or irrevocable. They're only structured as operational fair market value leases or $1 capital leases. The primary difference is the FMV or fair market value has a lower monthly payment than the $1, but it has a residual component that's often not disclosed to the buyer. It can be 10 to 30% of the original loan, but if it's not disclosed, if the principal is not disclosed, it's virtually impossible to do the math and understand the formula so that you can determine if this is in your best interest to keep the machine. A few factors play a role in that, and that is the meter count, basically like miles on a car. Is it a machine that can handle your volume? Most likely, yes. Is it a machine that can handle 2, 3, 4 times what you're currently doing? Likely, but we want to do the research on behalf of our buyers to make sure that we have, all that raw data. Part of our request for proposal asks all these questions, and as part of the service, I'm doing a lot of market research on behalf of that. I think that there is an issue in a lot of contracts with maintenance cost creep, meaning that the rates increase annually in a lot of contracts. There is no consistency with regards to how long the rates remain the same. Often it's 1 year, but it can increase in the second year, could increase the third, fourth, fifth, or sixth year if one gets that far. So those are just a handful of the issues or problems that exist in current contracts. The current contract, the lease, the maintenance, and the totality of what that is that you're financially obligated to or contractually obligated to is a target for the alternate vendors when one goes to market. They want to know what you're paying just as much as the incumbent vendor already knows. There's no motivation on the seller's part to reduce that. To reduce that spend would impact their company's profit and their commissions. So they're always on a constant quest to understand what their prospective client, these being the alternate sales reps, the alternate vendors, what you're spending. And when they can come up with an idea, they'll make their proposal. And sometimes people view that negatively and maybe kind of not like that because it's, I think most people see that as deceptive sales practices. When we're involved, we're wanting the same data. We want to know what your lease is so we can help counsel and guide the process, but it also serves as a benchmark. We know that it's not going to go higher. We believe that it'll go much lower. And we're motivated to make sure that you receive the best value, short and long term. And so that's why we benchmark the current contract. We I personally look at that as the problem, because there were likely non-disclosures and lack of transparency and omissions that exist that makes it difficult for buyers to really figure out what they have. So then we'll benchmark that current spend. We'll have conversations about what your needs are, what features, benefits, accessories, stapling, two-sided paper drawers, that type of thing. Maybe it's color, maybe it's black only. We'll have that conversation, and then we'll customize your request for proposal, the RFP, and copy you on all emails to the vendor, sending the RFP to a select group of vendors that are in your market. You may supply those reps and their information to me, or I can do research in your area through the NAICS code. But you might have reps that you never want to include for whatever reason, and I want to be aware of that as well. But when we send that RFP out to the vendors, we give them a reasonable time to respond. We'll compute that information and create an executive summary and or vendor comparison report and provide it to you. And the process that we take our clients through and how we get paid is usually a big question for people. That's certainly an important one. So we do not charge anything up front. There's no upfront fee or retainer. We wear the consulting hat in the data collection process, the benchmarking and the writing of the RFP. It's at the end of the process when you get the report. We will look at the benchmark, subtract the new contractual obligation, comparing it equally to the prior term. Again, as I said earlier, most terms are 60 months. So we'll compare the next new contract to 60 months. And the difference is what we call savings, or some call it cost avoidance. And we use 33% of that savings as our fee. The client, you, will always get 67 or keep that 67%. So no upfront fee, no retainer. Your net value for us working together is whatever we find, you're going to keep 67%. There's a lot that goes into the process, and we have frank and open conversations about the things that you like, things you don't like, or never want to see again. We encourage and welcome questions throughout the process. That's why we copy the clients on all emails. It's a big, important factor to me that we are dealing in a very transparent, full disclosure manner. We do this work virtually, so our clients will email us their lease or purchase agreement, their maintenance contract, if it's separate to the lease and or other contract, a meter report, pictures of the device, and that helps us match the invoices to the actual device. And when I see a picture, I'm able to see ID number, confirm the vendor who's servicing it. I can see trays and paper sources and stapling finishers to fully get a better picture as to what you have. Then I do the market research, and we just continue to have the conversation to make sure you have what you want. The phase that transitions this away from us working together to the vendor comes next. And there will be a time where when we pick that next winning vendor, I want to make sure that the items that cause future cost increases that we've already dealt with and negotiated in the proposal, that these language items get carried over to a contract. And when they do, that's when I have the client, you, sign your next agreement, and I submit my invoice. Once paid, we are here to support you for that next term without a fee. The contract will have been written a lot clearer and easier to reconcile invoices. Maybe you have questions about something that you thought you recalled in the process. I maintain a paper file, an electronic file, and a CRM, and probably won't be surprised whatever problem it is, we'll be able to figure it out. But you don't get charged for that. Once we're paid, we offer ongoing management, invoice reconciliation, help, guidance, coaching, whatever, through that next term without a fee. An example of that was recently in the Milwaukee, Wisconsin area. I visited a church school and met with the business manager. We had worked on 3 different cases over the last 4 or 5 years. And this business manager said to me, something's not right. I think we're paying too much. And I said, it's impossible. It can't be. I knew what we wrote for the new contract. I knew what we negotiated. And I asked for her to give me the current invoice that was of concern. And within just a few seconds, I noticed one digit was off at about 6 font on an invoice. What was supposed to be 0.0055 for black cost per copy was being charged at 0.055, or a nickel and a half versus a half penny. They were being charged 10 times. They did not fully catch that for 12 months. It came to $9,000-ish, and she pulled the contract and we matched it. We proved through that research and supporting documentation. She wrote an email to the vendor, copied me on the emails at my request, and they received a $9,000 refund check. That got her to think that, what about the other vendor and another machine? Well, she found something similar, but to the tune of $2,000. So they got $11,000 back because of this ongoing management that we offer. I think it's important because some things are accidental, unintentional, but as long as I've been in the business, I've seen things that are intellectually dishonest and intentional. And a belief, or what I think sometimes is a saying in the industry, is it's better to ask for forgiveness and permission. So if they can get away with it, they will. And that's a sad but true situation in this industry. An additional saying that they have is that there's margins in the mystery. And the reason they say that is that they hide a lot of fluff and extra costs in lease payments. And so by us going through a collaborative approach and talking about your current contract, and then you seeing our request for proposal process, that's all revealed when we're under contract with a client. You will have the opportunity to review that RFP before it goes out. If you see 77 questions and say, that's great, that's enough, we don't have any more, go ahead, send it to the vendor, I will. If you say, hey, I didn't see this, that, or the other thing, we want to ask that. Can we do that? Yes, you may, and highly encouraged. I will add that once you give a final approval on the RFP, then we'll send it to the vendors. And again, one machine is about 5 business day response time that we ask the vendor, but that's up to you. 2 to 5 machines, maybe 10 business days, and over 10 machines, maybe it's up to a month. It depends on the workload and what your interests are. The ideal time to get a conversation about your particular case is 6 to 12 months before a contract expires, and about 6 months before expiration is when we'd want to kick off a project. And the reason that is that vendors tend to delay more than the buyer or the client, but we have illnesses, vacations, and different situations that come into play. And our cases have ranged, or project beginning to close, have been 30 days or a month to 6 months, with the common range being around 60 to 90 days. Since these contracts are non-cancelable and irrevocable, doing anything much sooner than 6 months is almost always cost prohibitive to the buyer. And as nonprofits maximizing budgets, my role is to save you the money, not cause you a financial harm. If you had problems and it was constant and you wanted to talk about it and pursue something, then by all means, we could certainly have that discussion. But just know that the industry wants their money. And so whatever the payment is, they'll multiply it by remaining months, and that will either be refinanced in a new lease or must be paid somehow, some way. Very, very seldom does a lemon law scenario occur where you are relieved from your payments and responsibilities. Hard truth, but a real truth. So to wrap up, or to kind of bring this full circle, We want to talk with people free of charge. We offer a free assessment. Usually we have that done in about an hour. We certainly can talk hypotheticals if you do not want to provide your existing lease, maintenance contract, data, information. That will be okay. However, I won't be able to give you specific advice unless I had your actual contract, purchase agreement, maintenance agreement, meter report, and a picture. That's when we can really dive into it. And when we begin a project or a client engages with us, it's a requirement. We must have that because we have to speak to the exact terms and conditions that are in those contracts. We'll collect that data, we benchmark, we write the RFP, we'll evaluate the vendors fairly and equally. We'll recommend that next winning vendor. We'll close the project after they have written the important proposed items into the contract. You get the green light to sign. We invoice for our services. And again, once paid, we are there for you to support you. The unique thing with this strategic partner is that a collaborative approach exists here where you would be able to have a central purchasing resource. And we use a software that's been created over the last couple of years that we can send to vendors. If they answer the questions, it does the math, and we get emailed that they're done. If they are stinkers, if you will, and do not enter and just give us their long-winded proposal, then I take that, I print that off, I do manual math 3 to 4 times. In other words, I triple and quadruple check the math, I enter it in the system, and it must come out to the penny, and it has. But it's not until then that I double and triple check, quadruple check the math that I give you the report. I want it to be accurate before you get it. So with that said, I am open and interested in any questions. If you have any real world scenarios, if you're curious or I didn't address something, again, I welcome and encourage any questions. So does anybody have anything?
Do you have a broad? Hi, I'm John. I'm joining you from the West Coast in Arlington, Washington, about an hour north of Seattle. We've got a
Welcome,
preschool and
John.
childcare and
Okay.
church all together here, and we share one device.
Okay.
I'm curious, just kind of in broad terms, back of the envelope. You mentioned these lease payments versus outright purchase. What is kind of the relationship between the lease payments versus an outright purchase of the machine? Is there like a 50% markup, where the lease, is more manageable monthly but costs you more in the long term? Or do you have any kind of broad relationship of those two things?
Yeah, there's a couple of thoughts that come to mind. First, it's interest. There's a high implicit interest rate in these leases. If they bundle in the maintenance and they've factored in your approximate monthly volume, maybe inflated it a little bit and said, hey, you know what, we're going to give you this extra and we'll call it free toner, or it's included in one payment. That I call the illusion of simplicity, because you're paying interest on service technician labor and you're paying interest on the toner. Now, when you look at a lease and when you're speaking of that lease, I would go out on a limb and say and guess that you were not provided a truth in lending document or the formula to that lease, meaning that you might find it unusual when I say, do you know your rate factor or the residual that was built in or the principal funded in the lease? And most people won't know that. So if you said, no, I never heard of that before, that would be common. So you will probably know your monthly payment and the term and the structure. So there's only 2 structures. One, the capital lease, which is $1 buyout at the end, versus an operational lease or financing of what's called fair market value, abbreviated FMV commonly. Do those ring a bell to you?
So I don't know that I haven't looked at our documents, so I'm not sure what's there. So this was to help me just kind of go back and see what we have and
Yeah. So
Yeah.
I'll use round numbers. If it's $10,000 on a 60-month fair market value, you're going to have a borrow rate of around 0.02 or $20 per thousand borrowed. So 10,000 times 0.02 is $200. Multiply that by 60 months and you have a $12,000 commitment. If you had money in the bank and finances were no object and you knew that and that was presented to you, you'd probably pay the 10,000. But what's not disclosed in that is that there's a residual percentage of that loan of that 10,000 that if you said, boy, you know, we did a little research and this machine's going to last us the equivalent of 10, 15 years based on what we're doing, and our volume isn't that high. I heard about this premature upgrading. What if we kept it for a period of time? If you bought that out at the end and did not negotiate this percentage in advance prior to the signature on that lease, the leasing company determines that percentage. There's a trifecta of people here that get in on the deal behind the scenes: the leasing company, the servicing dealer, and the sales rep. The sales rep's the face of the conversation. And so if the leasing company, in what I'll say cahoots, in collaboration with the vendor, says, hey, they want to buy it out, I think we'll charge them 15 or 20 or 30% of that loan. So it means that you'd owe $1,500, $2,000, or $3,000 to get out of the lease, as opposed to the $1 capital. Now the $1 has a higher monthly payment. It might be $225 versus $200. So part of our process, ask these questions. That's when we would have the conversation. Which one makes the most sense? Our software automatically determines that. So we're able to cut out all the headaches and the time, and it tells us that's just an added value. But at the end of the day, let's just say then it's 30%. You're not happy, but you know what? It's going to last a long time, and 3,000 is cheaper than buying another one at 10 grand, right? So you write out a $3,000 check and you own it, and you think you're off to the races. Feel good. But then the servicing dealer says, the parts are going to cost a lot more, and we got to send out a technician more often. You put more miles on the proverbial car, the rates are going to increase. Is this a color device, John?
Yes.
So there's two costs per copies or cost per image, black and color. And if they happen to set that up with rich black, it uses color. So black only might be charged at color. That's a print rule. It's another conversation we want to have. You want to make sure it's black toner only so the black meter is tripping. It's a sidebar tip. Anyhow, the servicing dealer says, you know what, sorry to the sales rep, you didn't get a new sale. You aren't going to get your quota, but we'll try to help you out. We'll raise the rates and disincentivize the customer. We won't tell anybody, but behind the scenes, I believe that happens. I know it does. When I worked in the industry, that was part of the process. So I'm suspicious of it when I hear it, and I think it's going to happen. People will know when when they look at their invoices and compare to the old. And as part of my research, when I ask for the submission of the invoices, I'm looking at that, and I can, tell pretty clearly what that is and what that percentage was. It becomes a very confusing process. Unfortunately, it happens. We want to trust but verify, but ultimately you want that negotiated up front before you sign the contract. So we want the lowest principal cost. We want the lowest rates locked as long as possible, with annual percentage increase as low as possible for as long as possible, with a lot of disclosures for life cycle, duty cycle, preventative maintenance schedules, and general process. I just said a lot there. That's one of the reasons that I do the RFP and I offer my services free after we're done. Because you will remember a portion of it. I think there's statistics out there that we remember 10% of what we heard. Well, I'm the other 90% for you. Quite likely I'll find it. Maybe you remember half. I don't know. You might remember it all. I'm not sure. But at the end of the day, I just want to be there for you and all the churches and schools in the ELA schools group. So interestingly, if there were numerous ones in the same area or zone or territory, and we saw John Doe at ABC Company selling the same machine to somebody else for $7 grand and you got charged 10, I would be looking at that as well. You might not have knowledge of that. you might not have that in your day-to-day interest level to talk to everybody that's your colleague to say, what did you do? And a lot of times I don't find people communicating with that. So as a central purchasing hub, my goal is to try to track and monitor that. And of course, I'd have files if you weren't sure and I wasn't sure and we'd want to look it up, do a little research. We certainly would have that access to that. But I just subscribe to Trust But Verify. Sorry for the long-winded answer, but I want to try to help you process that.
Yeah, thanks.
Did that answer your question?
Yes. So now I need to go do some homework and figure out which kind of thing we're under, if it's the $1 or the fair market value.
Yeah, and if you emailed it to me, it's held in the strictest of confidence. Or if you want to schedule a call after, this goes for anybody, and you keep it before you hand it over to me, I'll ask you questions. I'll point out to it. I can use a different lease to point out where it might be, just to guide you. And then we can talk about different aspects of that and what that might look like. As part of the free assessment, to make it the most valuable, I need to look at the existing contract that you're under because they're tied specifically to that church or school or whoever the lessee is legally.
Thanks.
Al,
You're
I was
welcome.
just going to point out that Becky mentioned that they had a tariff charge on their last invoice, and when they asked about it, it was waived. But again, as we've talked about many times, a lot of people don't notice those kind of charges just because they're not familiar or they're not the ones handling those invoices all the time.
And who is that person?
That was Becky.
Becky, that's the first time I've ever heard of that. I want to see that. If you were willing to give it to me, I'm going to say that's not true. But that's just my gut feeling right now. I think that was a play on the environment that we're living in. I know of nobody that I've never read that, never heard that. I'm in a lot of networking groups on LinkedIn, a lot of groups. That's the first time. I wondered when it was going to come up. I'm not saying it's not real. I'm not saying that they wouldn't have, but the fact that they waived that adds to my suspicion. So it's just one of those items that you want to be super vigilant on. And if I think they were just trying to pull a fast one, humbly speaking. So, it's just, it's hard to know, but I'm glad you got it waived. I know I spoke a lot. I tried to cover everything with no question. Sometimes I think, well, then I just answered everybody's question, but I know I didn't. I'm sure there's a lot out there. But when you're looking at your contract and you're not sure, that's the benefit of the free assessment. So I don't sell these devices. I don't fix them. So I'm not motivated to use a deceptive sales practice to get you to buy something from me other than my service. I just want to be really clear on that. There are online services that appear like what I offer. I have completed the forms thinking, oh, I've got a competitor, only to find out it's the selling dealer crafting their questionnaire to look like an impartial, vendor neutral type consulting company. And they now have collected all that data and then they reach out trying to sell me a copy or something. So, yeah. I'm glad you point that out to the BBB there, Corey. We're a recently accredited BBB A+ accredited company. And they have a link and they have a lot of information out there. So,
yeah, I just wanted to put all your contact information in there for anybody who wanted to do a little bit more.
Yeah.
Or reach out to you after our webinar today.
Yeah, there's quite a list of testimonials at copierconsultingllc.com. We have a reference list. If there's a few of them that don't want to go on video and do a video testimonial and they don't want to write one because of their job or position, but they're happy to take phone calls. So that's why they're on the reference list. We have a YouTube channel. If you just search out Copier Consulting, I've got a couple educational voiceovers that I've done and some video testimonials from different people in different backgrounds, positions. The nonprofit world that I've worked in with church and schools, regardless of denomination, regardless of anything, the problem lies within the contract and the process that people are put through and so forth. Is there a visual picture of your process?
Yeah, so just like you work, you give you a call, do the assessment, take pictures of the machine, like a workflow that's in a picture form to help. So if I want to present this, I can say, "Here, council, here's the like what we're going to go through," and that kind of thing.
Yeah, I have a data collection sheet and a scope of work. Each are one page. The scope of work is listed out as the schedule that I would take you through. It's 3 phases: the data collection, the RFP, and the vendor evaluation. It explains what I just said. Would that be helpful?
Yeah, I think that would be helpful.
The about us, our process page also has a general idea or a layout of the our processes. ARE, assess, research, and evaluate on the website. It does list it out there. But
Al,
I can,
I see the data collection checklist, which I can share from a Google Drive. If you want, I see a capability statement. I don't think I have the,
scope of work.
yes.
I'll get that to you.
Okay, is that okay if I share that
Yes.
data collection?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep. All of that can be shared. That's nothing to hide from. It's very helpful for people just to kind of get an idea. It comes back to the transparency aspect or value.
All right, so that's the data collection sheet. And then let me also drop in there the capability statement, which I just think is helpful, especially if you're sharing this with other committees or people in your network. All right. Somebody give me the thumbs up that that is actually what I shared, because I have a habit of copying and pasting without actually hitting copy and paste correctly.
Let's see.
Opening to the right things. I can probably click
Yep.
on myself too. Perfect.
There you go. Data collection.
And I'll link these to the recording as well. It'll go on our YouTube page and
Okay.
send it out to everybody who registered. I'll make sure that those links get in that email as well.
All right. That sounds good. And if anybody has any questions after that, they can certainly email me or call me. Happy to talk about your current situation, answer any questions that you have, walk you through the best next steps and suitable timing.
All right. Any other questions from anyone?
Thank you, Al. You had years of experience kind of brain dumping on us. So
Yeah.
and I'm kind of sitting in for the church administrator today. So I will pass along your information and we might be looking you up. I don't know when the lease agreement even, what we're looking at, but I appreciate the work you're doing. So thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. And of course, feel free to email me or call me and we can talk
Okay.
about just make it easy for you. I do a lot of the heavy lifting for you on purpose. It's intentional.
Yeah.
I don't want you to have to worry about it.
Okay. Yeah, no, that would be helpful. So
I have a lot of examples if you can't figure out what I'm talking about. I do Loom voiceover videos too, where I'll point to different things because I don't want you to have to read all the fine print. Just happen to
Right.
think of that. I create quite a bit of that in real application. So specific to the client at hand.
Right. Awesome. All right. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Great. Thanks so much, Al. We'll close it down. Blessings to all of you on the rest of your afternoon. Hopefully everybody's in afternoon now. Maybe not quite. Thank you for all this information, and hopefully people have your contact and can get started saving some money and some headaches.
Yeah, I think they'll be surprised, happily surprised.
Right, right. All right. Thanks,
All right.
everybody.
Thanks, everybody. Have a good rest of your day. Nice to meet you.